Well, good morning again. I'd like to welcome everybody. Just a couple real quick housekeeping items. We've got quite a few on the webinar today, so we've got everybody muted. So if you have questions as we walk through this, the dialog box in the GoToMeeting dialog up on the either probably right-hand corner or the top of your screen has a place for questions. So if you want to place questions in there, you can do it as we're going through. When we wrap up here in 20-25 minutes, I'll go through all the questions and answer any questions you have related to anything related to the process. So real quickly, if I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you, I'm Mike McCarty, CEO of Safe Hiring Solutions, also founder and CEO of RefLink and Safe Visitor. And we are launching Safe Recruiter at the moment, and I'll give you guys just a real little, quick snapshot of that here in a second, just to let you know what's going on with some of these programs and opportunities to learn more about them. I'm president of the Indiana Association of Background Screeners. We are the only state association in the country, so a lot of what we're going to talk about today, we are generally waist deep in most of this at the legislature. I've been involved in this over the summer with the Summer Education Interim Study Committee. So, we try to represent the schools and bring some understanding of background screening and process to the state as they're looking at ways of, making schools safer. So we'll probably be calling on you guys as well over the fall as we look at some of the potential legislation and some of the feedback, especially related to the DCS and some of the new process that took effect this July. My background prior to starting Safe Hiring 12 years ago was a violent crime detective in Nashville, Tennessee, and have done a lot of work, Department of Defense, Justice, Homeland Security related to violence prevention type issues. Quick update before we get into the topic today, Safe Visitor. There may be several of you on the webinar today that are actually utilizing Safe Visitor, but Safe Visitor is a visitor management system that we built a couple years ago. We've got a large number of Indiana school districts that use Safe Visitor. It manages all types of visitors coming into your facilities. It could be a temporary visitor, that would be like me coming in for a meeting. It manages your volunteers and your vendors, and so it just manages that whole process. Kiwanis has just recently adopted it to manage their volunteers worldwide. Safe Recruiter is a new program we are literally rolling out right now. Cool thing for schools, it's probably right in your price range. There is no cost to schools to participate in Safe Recruiter. And so what Safe Recruiter does is we are bridging the gap between schools and employers, especially in advanced manufacturing, logistics, healthcare, really working with schools to help implement programs for the 70+% of students that are not going on to post-secondary education, but they're looking for some guidance in career opportunities, so they're not laboring away, in fast food, for 2 or 3 years, or going to school for a year or two and accruing, $10, $15, $20,000 worth of debt to realize that's really not the direction that they wanted to go. And so we're creating partnerships with schools and employers that will create internships, also utilizing our employers as volunteers to be able to come into schools and teach classes to work on what we call soft skills or employable skills. We currently are partnering with Ivy Tech so that it also creates opportunities for the students to receive dual credits. We've got 3 large employers on the pilot programs, which is GNC, Walmart, and Advanced Auto, that are standing up these pilot programs. So we've got a couple of ongoing webinars, and so if you have interest in any of these, and RefLink is our automated reference checking platform, then you can sign up. Just simply go to our website, safehiringsolutions.com. Under the resource tab, there'll be a flyout at the bottom, says webinars. If you click on that, you have the ability to register for any of these recurring webinars to learn more about any of these programs. So what do we want to talk about today? First, kind of the foundation of what's driving a lot of this discussion, and some of the functionality changes we're making is just the compliance with state laws. As I mentioned, we're actively involved with the state legislature. I was asked to come in July, myself and DCS, to really give kind of a state of implementation report, how it was working from the DCS side, and I really was asked to speak to how this process was working from the school side. And so, what I testified to is there's a lot of things that could make the process work a lot smoother and a lot better, and so that's kind of where we're at. We agree that the DCS check has proven itself to be really a viable tool. It just needs a lot of work in terms of making the process a little bit smoother. Right now, we have to, we took their form because it's a requirement to send them the information on their form. So we created an overlay and tried to make this a more electronic process to make the process smoother, so we can get that information submitted to them. Then what we're hoping to do is to be able to create this process so it becomes a total electronic process, so we can remove that form, because the form is creating some problems with the process. And so compliance is the other area that I spoke of in July. I said, so the concern from the school side was multiple kind of levels. The first level, there was fear, how long is it going to take to complete this? And the law gives you 90 days. And what happens at the 91st day? So I shared, with the policymakers, some concerns with, how long the process is going to take. And so fortunately, what we've seen, most of the DCS checks in Indiana are not taking near as long as we thought they might. And they are a bit slower when there's some kind of substantiation, and we'll talk about how that works and why that really starts to slow down. But the other area that I mentioned from a compliance standpoint was concern from the schools that what happens when our candidates have lived out of state, and Indiana has no control over out-of-state equivalents of Department of Child Services in their process. And what we found is the vast majority of states require the candidate to initiate that process on their own. And so that removes you and Safe Hiring both from this process, because we can't do it for them, and we have no control over how long it takes. I think, Bridget, is there 10 states that, or 5 to 10 states, we can't even do an index check in. So I shared that information, and so hopefully what we'll see is maybe some massaging of the language coming out of the next session, just because there's places you just simply can't do the check, and in those states they don't really care if the law was passed in Indiana. If you don't have access to it, they're not going to grant us access to it. So we're continuing to be a voice for change in that process. The other thing that I would mention is it came up in the hearing. One of the senators asked about what kind of process is in place to ensure that schools are using a correct process and complying with the state law. And I know I've personally reviewed an out-of-state screening firm that had kind of flooded the state with information and a lower priced, expanded criminal history check. And I've shared with several schools that shared the information with us. There was 4 areas right on their front page where they were completely out of step with state law here in Indiana. So it was either the depth or scope of the search didn't comply with what was required under the state law. And so compliance is a big concern, with the state education policy makers, and just making sure that that following the law and the requirements that are inside those statutes. So a little bit of the update on the DCS process. It is still a clunky process. We are meeting with their team. We've got a good working relationship with DCS that started long before the law was passed, which helps a lot. But we're meeting in early October to evaluate now, after 3 months, what it looks like on their side. We've got some technology that, I've been talking with them that I think could really help them on their side, but it would certainly help tremendously on this side, because what we see is, I couldn't give you an estimate, but there are a high percentage of the forms that are filled out by your candidates are being kicked back. And so we're serving as that intermediary, and a lot of them are really small technical little changes to the form that need to happen, that really is being captured in the background check process already. So we're really trying to bring a solution to the table where the information that we're already capturing could be pushed over to DCS. So we'll keep you up to date on that. Just know that we know the process is clunky. We've made it as smooth as we can possibly make it at this time, but that we are still working, our CIO and is working closely with the background screening unit at DCS to really look at some future changes to make this a much smoother process for everybody. Changes coming to the DCS check. One of the reasons we moved the DCS piece of this out of the package is because we didn't have any idea how long it was going to take for Indiana DCS checks to complete, nor did DCS, because their estimation or estimate that they were giving on the number of checks they should expect was way lower than what we accurately kind of told them to expect. And so they had no idea going into July, August, and now into September what this volume is going to look like, how it was going to impact them. So we wanted to keep the index check outside of the expanded criminal history check, just because we didn't want it to hold up that process for 30 or 60 or even 90 days that was allowed under the law, if in fact it was going to take that long. So now that we see that it's really tracking quite a bit faster than that, we're going to move it back into the package, so everything will be contained in one spot in that profile, so you won't have two separate reports on a candidate. The good news is that if we can flip this then to an electronic or a total electronic process, that we think this will really help as well with the speed and the turnaround on these. How the process works, we've had, I don't know the exact number, but I would say over the last 2.5 months we've probably had at least a dozen or more substantiated cases that we've seen. Interestingly enough, the majority of these do not have criminal cases that attach to them, because criminal cases were not filed, and that's another area that we are talking to policymakers about, because there are some potential concerns that you might have under the EEOC or even the Fair Credit Reporting Act if you're taking information that's substantiated but a prosecutor didn't feel like there was enough to file charges, and how do you handle that information and what do you do with it. The other piece to that is when that form gets filed electronically, it goes to the state, their background check unit. They run the report. If it's substantiated, we get a report back from the state that basically says substantiated, gives us contact information to follow up with the county. So the actual verification of the hit, so to speak, is with the county, and so we have to take that information, make contact with the county, send them information, and then we're at their mercy to get that information back to us. So we're having a bit of a disconnect at times. There's some counties where they're not giving the information. The state DCS office has put out information that telling them to. So we're addressing this on a couple levels. And so if you have a substantiated case, sometimes those are going to track a little bit slower just because of kind of how the process works. So all of this being said, from a foundational standpoint, what we needed was to look at this process and the new requirements and really think through, is there some functionality that we can add in the software so that we can, release some of this burden off you and off of your candidates from a financial perspective. And so we've created some functionality. We want to release this in October. And we will let you know exactly when we're going to make this change over the first week. We certainly won't be able to move 250 schools at one time, so we'll probably do this in kind of waves. And so if you watch your dashboard inside, our background screening where you have news and announcements, you'll see an announcement in there as we start this process. But what we've been able to do is create some functionality that really probably the vast majority, 90+% of your candidates are going to see a cost savings here. Majority of them are probably going to see upwards of a $10 per background check savings, especially if they've lived continuously in Indiana or most of their life in Indiana and only one county, maybe in another state. Those, small percentage of candidates that you have that have lived in multiple counties outside of Indiana still may see an increased fee, just like they see an increased fee now to comply with state law. But I would say probably 95+% of your candidates are going to see a savings of around $10 as we implement this new process. So here's what the new process, our new pricing is going to look like. So it'll be $21.95 for the expanded criminal history check, which is currently $31.50. Not all schools outsource the DCS or license verification. Some of you are handling that internally. So there's the pricing. If you are outsourcing those to us, then you add those into the cost of the background check. So it runs about $10 less than what we are currently charging with the expanded criminal history checks. So that is kind of everything we wanted to capture here quickly. Wanted to share with you just some of the new programs we have, some of the compliance, and we are looking at some of the draft legislation that may be introduced this year. And once we see where that's tracking this fall, we'll be able to keep you informed with that. Here's my contact information. I'm going to pause for a second, open up the dialog box, and see what kind of questions we have. One question is, how long before we get the backlog of DCS checks cleared? Really hard to answer because we don't have any control over that process. So I don't know. I can't answer that from a DCS perspective. DCS not in all state. What does Indiana state say we do? Not exactly certain what this question's asking. Yeah. So I think what you're asking is if a state does not allow us to obtain that and your candidate had lived in that state, then I would just simply, make a notation in the file because there's really nothing else you can do if it can't be completed. Why send complete when DCS not completed? Well, the way the current package is set up, we've got the expanded criminal history check as one part of the process, and we've got the DCS check as a separate. And the reason for that is it allowed a school to have the flexibility from a policy level to say whether or not you wanted to place somebody once the expanded criminal history was complete. Technically or legally under state law, Indiana allows you up to 90 days to complete the expanded criminal history check, so you can actually employ somebody for up to 90 days. I wouldn't recommend it until the expanded criminal history check is complete. Same thing applies to the DCS. So that's why you're getting two different notifications is because we didn't know how long the DCS check was going to take. So, you know, if we're getting the background check back and you wanted to place that person while you're waiting on the DCS check. What is a draft application? So when you see a draft application in your dashboard, that means it has not been completed. So if that was initiated by a candidate, they started the process, but they never finished it. You can push them through. The problem is if your candidates are paying with a credit card, you don't really want to push them through because it's going to push it through and then it's going to invoice you as the school. So if you see that you have any in draft, that your candidate needs to log back in and they have the credentials to log back into the system and complete the process. Okay, the last question related to the DCS link needs to be sent to an applicant that did not apply online. We're just going to follow up with you directly and how you handle that. All right, I believe that is all of the questions. Again, you've got our contact information here. If you think of something after we get off the phone, feel free to give us a call, send us an email. Don't forget some of the future webinars coming up over the next several weeks if you want more information on some of the other process. Otherwise, we'll be communicating the 1st of October as we start to convert this new pricing and model into place. Thanks for your time, and we hope you have a great day.